live paint. I'm really excited to share this with you. So the idea of painting live with you so you can interact with me is something that I've wanted to bring to online, but just haven't figured out how, and now we've done it. So I want to just walk you through what a live paint is like. So what I'm doing now is I'm just taking all acrylic. This is all acrylic paint, and I've got a lot of water, and I'm just loosely sketching in my design for painting on the canvas. This is an 8x10 canvas. I have taken acrylic paint and just primed it red before I started. I like having that red warmth underneath. I tend to use a lot of cool colors. That helps me just balance the warmth. I'm just taking almost washes of the colors on my palette just to indicate this is a dark area, this is a lighter area. I'm also trying to put together the design and the composition that I want to go with. And I'm going to be doing some sunflowers. I tend to look at flowers in my room. I have a bouquet of flowers in my room, but I'm not painting from still life, if that makes sense. I'm putting my own spin on the things I see in my room. So I have a bouquet of about this big of flowers in my room, and there's one sunflower. So I'm just modifying it to be what I want it to be. And again, like I said, this is acrylic. I'm almost making a wash with some water and the color. It's on my Stay Wet palette that you see here to the right. This palette allows your paint to stay wet for up to a month, at least for me. It could vary depending on where you live, but I set my palette up, I work from it, and I set my palette up the same way each time. I'm trying to figure out compositionally, do I want one flower? Do I want to add more? And you'll see me just live painting. I'm making decisions as I'm going in. I'm not looking from a picture or from a still life. I'm making decisions as I work around. You'll see that everything in here changes a little bit as I decide. And I firmly believe that inspiration exists, but it has to find you working. So one of the ways that I work through that is to just pick up paint and start going, and don't really invest too much in the final result. I kind of work through something and see if it, is something that I'm liking. If not, I can change it at this point because there's very little paint down on my canvas. And of course it's acrylic, so, there's nothing Gesso can't fix. I'm using a size 6 brush. It's a fairly, middle-sized one. I'm working on 8x10 canvas, so it's a good middle size for that type of piece. It's a filbert brush, meaning it's got a little rounded edge. Anything that you want to do is up to you. Don't pick this specific brush if you have tons of brushes at home. It's just, this is a catalyst brush. When you're using acrylic, and I happen to be using heavy-bodied acrylic, it just is a really nice brush to move the paint around. It's got this really strong bristle on it, and it helps the paint release from the tips a lot easier. So again, it doesn't even matter what color. I mean, I know in the back of my head I'm using sunflowers, so yellow kind of makes sense, but it doesn't really matter at this point what color you use because it's such a light wash that you'll be able to paint over it no problem. And I've decided to go with 3 flowers, that rule of odd numbers. So I know that I want to have 1 or 3, and 3, I was trying to make a leaf over there and decided, nope, that's a flower. So you'll see I'm also cleaning my brush on the side, dipping it in some water, cleaning it off. And that's really all you'll need to do while you're working through this. I'm trying to proportionately here make the vase something that could hold the weight of the flowers. Again, it's abstract, so I'm not looking for realism here, but sometimes we just want to make things make sense, and that's what I'm trying to do. I have added some purple into my yellow, and that's a way to make like a really earthy yellow. By using complementary colors, you'll get like a darker, earthier, richer tone to your color. And I'm just trying to make something that's a bit darker, so a shadow of a yellow, and that's what I'm doing here. Now I'm kind of trying to figure out what that shadow color will be, and then I decide, let's just work on the inside of the sunflower. One of the probably typical mistakes I see when people are painting sunflowers is they haven't looked at sunflowers enough, and they don't realize that the center of a sunflower is ginormous, and they paint it really small and they paint these really big petals. But really the meat of a sunflower is the center. So I'm going in there to make that darkest part first and trying to shape it so it's rather large. And then I'll paint the petals behind it. You'll see that I've just kind of right up here, that way, I put my brush into that white substance right there. That is actually open gel. It's because I like to work wet on wet. It's just a gel kind of paint extender. It keeps the paint wet longer, so I can do a little bit more blending. For those of you that don't like that, you don't have to use that. But if you live in Arizona, that's a great way to keep your paint wet longer because it dries, everything dries so quick there. But it's just another way to extend the wetness of your paint. And I'm also, if you see as I'm looking around, using some of those colors as open paint as well. I do like the extra drying time it gives me, especially flip-flopping between oils and acrylic. There's some ways I like to use acrylic that dries fast, and there are some times where I just want to work through blending color, and that's why I'm using that extender in there. I'm also using a Stay Wet palette. Like I said, that'll keep the paint wet too, so I've kind of got a lot of things working towards that blending of color for me, and that's how I like to work. But work to whatever's comfortable for you, and you'll see I keep dipping into that just a little bit just to keep the paint more workable. I want more workability time for my paint because I really do like working wet on wet. And I'm really not using a lot of paint. This is what I would call the sketching portion of the painting. I'm committing, but I'm not overcommitting. Anything I've done so far can still be moved and modified, but I want to now get this mapping of like this part's going to be yellow and this part's going to be dark and this part's going to be leaf and stem and vase, and really that's what I'm doing. I'm deciding how big my subject will be and where the petals will end. And I'm trying to paint this sunflower so that it's just slightly turned, and you'll see that that's why it's a little bit shallower of petal on the left side and a little bit longer on the right. And since I have that color already on my brush, I want to go ahead and paint in the size at least, or the area that I want to have those flowers in. Their side views. One of the things that I know about myself is I tend to make everything the same size. So this is a great way to vary the sizing of your subject matter by putting one front ways and putting some sideways, and you'll see that I make the one at the side view that's on top a little bit wider than I make this one here. I've got a little bit of a green-blue mixture. I don't very often use black on my palette. I really like using the colors of a rainbow to mix my darks in there, and it just makes life easier. So I'm just sketching in. Again, these are really wonky and really loose, and I'm holding my brush a little bit further back so I can make sure that these are loose and kind of flowy. I'm again adding some of that open gel medium to my paint so it stays wet just a little bit longer, get some more blendability in there. And I'm just adding now greenery around that flower. I think a lot of times the perception is you go in and you're painting a flower, and sometimes it's just figuring out what area of your canvas is going to be for flower and what area is not. And that's really what I'm doing here. I don't really hone in on any one thing until I've got it all relatively mapped out, and then the magic begins. So I'm making some decisions here. I think probably one of the most difficult things I do is trying to figure out, okay, what color's the vase? What color's the background? The flowers, that makes sense. Some flowers are going to be yellow. So I decide I want to make this a clear vase. So I've got to make sure I've left stems in the vase because it's going to be transparent. So I'm just really loosely, again, these are probably the worst stems you've ever seen, but I'll kind of tighten them up as I work through, but I just need to leave like placeholders for where they'll be when I start painting the background. And you'll see I paint the background in around them because they need to be part of the flower. If the flower at the top is that color, then the flower at the bottom right now needs to be mapped in that same color. So I've taken a little bit of that purple and I'll mix a little bit of that blue, and I'm shaping the vase by creating a shadow on the bottom there. So I'm not really going around and shaping the vase as much as I'm shaping the area around the vase. I call this working from the outside in. I'm kind of using what's on the background to shape what subject matter I have. Still very loose, still very watery. It's like a wash of color still. It's just a dark wash. The bottom of that glass vase will have some shadow on there. So I figure while I have it on my brush, just go ahead and throw it in there. It's still all very undefined, but it's giving me a little bit more understanding of where everything's going to be in the end. So what color is the right color for the background? Always teal. So I'm taking some teal, putting a little bit of that open medium in there. If you notice, this is still quite a very transparent. It's not really a wash, but I've got a lot more medium to paint in there because I still don't want to commit to something that's solid and flat, but I do need to define my space. So I'm just going in there. I've changed the size of my brush. Not sure if you noticed, I'm using a bigger brush. This will make it, number one, looser, but since this is a wider area, it just makes it easier to paint. And I need to put in a table, and I realize as I'm doing this, I forget that I'm putting in a table, so you'll see me just kind of wipe that paint away. Another bonus of using the open medium is if I decide I don't want something there, it gives me a little extra time to just take a paper towel and wipe it back, which is kind of fun. So again, super loose, just kind of going around, separating my background from my foreground, kind of deciding the shape and where the gaps will be. I get some mixes, you'll see I get some of that yellow in there, and that's perfectly fine for me. I've decided to add a little bit of that ultramarine blue in there because I want to get a little bit of shadow in there, but it's not really even committing at this point. Again, working outside in, I am shaping around that vase by using the background. And you'll see I kind of come inside of the vase because remember the vase is going to be glass, so it's see-through, and I forget, oh look, there's a table. Why don't I go all the way down? Maybe not. So yeah, that's a little confusing there. I confuse myself. I get a little excited. And I just take a paper towel, it's acrylic, I can paint over it, it's not a problem, and I just kind of wipe it back so I have the visual. And really, this is all a part of creating this. It's almost like a coloring book. We're coloring by number. We're mapping in. This is the teal. This is the yellow. This is the dark. This is the light. And then now that I've got that mapped out, painting it is a breeze. It's almost like this is the most difficult part of a painting is figuring out what am I painting and what's the composition. And I'm just going in there, kind of taking the paint off my brush and then cleaning again. So now I'm going to mix a color for the table. And I want like a whitish color, but I don't want it to be pure white. So you'll see I've got blue still left on my brush. It's mixing with the yellow. I just want a neutral. I want a nondescript color. But I don't want it to be distinctly white. Again, shaping the shape of the vase around the outside, using that table as a guide to decide my composition. And I'm also remembering that there's going to be a dark area at the bottom. That's going to be the reflection of the table as well as the shadow, and I'm just painting around that. You'll see also, because I've left that purple a little bit wet, that's that shadow. When I go into it, it makes this great kind of diffused color. And that's what I was hoping for. And that's kind of what oils will do, but you can do that same thing in acrylic, which is beautiful because it dries a whole lot faster and you're able to kind of keep stylistically the look you want. And for me, it's wet on wet. For those of you that have kind of come from a watercolor background, you'll know that means your colors kind of blend together and they make more of a married effect. Again, I don't use a lot of black. I like to mix my dark colors to get a neutral dark, and that's what I'm doing here. And I know just by painting a lot and looking at sunflowers that if it's turned in that way, I'm going to need a darker area on one side than the other. So just trying to make a nice dark so it looks shadowed. The darks kind of fall back and the light colors come forward. So what I'm doing here is creating some depth by using that dark color. And you'll see I reshape and fade it out to the right side, blending in with that yellow, which is another bonus of having that color stay a little bit wet because I'm really marrying this color into the other. Picking up a little bit more of that open medium. And if you've never used that open medium before and you don't like it, that totally makes sense. If you like your paint to dry fast, go with that. But if you haven't used it before and you'd like to try it, I recommend it. You'll get these really nice blendies, because that's a word. And you'll see how that light right next to that dark there of those petals, that helps to create that definition I'm looking for. And I'll keep building up layers. It's the beauty of acrylic. You can keep building up layers. I start rather dull and dark, and then as I build up layers, I'm able to really capitalize on building it almost out with layers of color, but also depth. And each layer gets a little bit lighter as I come out, and that's just by mixing colors, just slightly by adding brighter tones. And that's the benefit here, especially the yellow, which I find is really hard to work with. If you have a bright yellow, a warm yellow, and a cool yellow, that what I have here, or a bright yellow and a dull yellow, you can really play with those mixtures. And because I'm really painting like as I would paint, I'm not editing all the ugly stuff out. It kind of can get a little ugly here as you're working through, and you just gotta step away, maybe move around to another spot until you feel comfortable again, and then come back to it with a little bit of fresh eyes. This painting took me start to finish. I think it was 1 hour and 3 minutes. I've kind of time-lapsed just a little so you don't have to wait for paint to dry in there. But overall, I'm really trying to use this as a practice to just be loose. And I encourage you to not overthink what you're working on as well. There are some basics that you can only get the more you practice. And that's really what I want you to use these lessons on. The practice in building up your confidence and really learning how to see the colors that you already have in your palette or already used to wielding in a new way. All right, and this is just that diary line, pure on the brush, and now I'm working on bringing that lightness up on those flowers that are fading off into the back. Also notice, as I'm bringing these flowers in the back to life, they'll remain a little bit more dull because they're further back. So as far as focus, the focus is really on this first big, large sunflower, and those, even though they're still distinct, they'll be a little bit more diffused. I'm making this stem area of the sunflower a little bit darker because I want them to fall back. Remember, to the dark colors fall back and light colors come forward. So what that does is just push those a little bit further in the background. Now they'll get layers, so they'll change a little bit, but by having at least that under painting of dark, that allows me to push them further back into the piece. Making decisions. And I'm really bad at cleaning my brushes, so there's always remnants of the last color, but I think that is a really, one of the ways that my colors all end up marrying, because if I've not cleaned my brush entirely, you get a little bit of the last color in the next color, and it kind of makes it a little bit more cohesive. At least that's the story I'm going with. Still adding a little bit more of that open in there. I'm blending now that area of the stem that touches the flower just to make it less distinct, softening it. Just a little bit more of that blending in there. Trying to add some more highlights. So these would be, think of like catch lights. You want to have that brightest light kind of catching on the edges of those petals. So that's what I'm trying to do. I'm not covering up what I've left before, but as you look, each of the brighter colors become a little bit less. You know, we've got this bold area of dull color, and then it gets a little bit lighter and a little bit smaller an area as I work up. And now really, I'm just using the directionality of the brushwork, the brush strokes, to create the illusion of petals. Notice I do not actually create distinct petals. I'm more painting where the light falls than I am painting each distinct image. And that's why I call this abstract florals, because I'm not trying to paint realism. I'm painting where I would see light reflecting. And I know that that's general even in realistic, but I want it much looser. So it's more of an abstraction of what I really would see. Again, just making the tops of those that would catch the light a little bit lighter so that the base of that stem falls a little bit further back. And if I've got that on my brush, I'm going to have to go down and put on the stems because remember, this is transparent. So light will be reflecting and refracting through the glass. And I'm not actually doing anything much different, but just getting a little bit lighter with my layers. I'd already shaped it out the first go through when I mapped it in. But now that I know where it is, I can just play with capturing that light throughout the piece. It's really, I find, simplifies the process. Figuring out what I want to paint is the most difficult part, and then finessing it is a little bit easier once I've made that decision. So now I want to play with that background color because, you know, you can play with teal and make one teal better than the other. So I will work this in layers, and by having those flowers still wet and movable, by using that medium, I'm able to get these cool blends and shape without it looking like I've just painted on top. It's all like a story happening on one layer. You can't tell, did the background come first, did the flowers come first? I don't paint the background and put the flowers on top. They're all kind of a part of the same story, the same layer. And that, I guess maybe that's stylistically what I love in my paintings, and that's why I do that. It's not right or wrong, it's just what I love. Those little touches where that yellow touches that teal is, I love it. That was my French impersonation, by the way. So notice, I'm leaving this little red gap because I love those red accents, but I'm painting the inside of this glass because it's going to be transparent. You're going to be able to see the wall behind it. If I leave it dark in there, it's just going to look like it's not part of the piece. But by painting around those stems and adding that same color to the background, all of a sudden it looks a little bit more dreamy and as if it's meant to be there. Still shaping from the outside in. I like to use the background layers to shape my subject. And I'm really still holding my brush further at the end. I'm loose. I don't care if it touches because I know as acrylic, I can paint layers and layers on top and keep doing this back and forth. This is only an 8x10. It's large enough to really do a nice image, but it's also small enough that if I needed to repaint something, it doesn't take me a long time. If I were doing a large 6-foot painting, if I made a whoopsie, I'd have to repaint the background of a large piece. So I would say take some liberties and make a mess because these are such doable size pieces that when they're done, they're going to have this layered effect, this whimsical brushwork that I want you to practice working on, but also you can change your mind halfway in and just add a couple more layers and it's perfect. It's the perfect time and size for doing these little practices and little studies. And by the end, like here's another thing, I always talk to my mentees about creating a body of work. Well, body of work, you know, is subjective and whatever, but just size can bring it in. So after, 6 weeks, you've got 6 paintings that are starting to stylistically look like your handwork and your brushwork. So when you're done, you're actually building bodies of work, but you're also learning and practicing and honing and developing your style. And that's what this live paint will give you, asking questions, funneling through what you're working on. This one is recorded, but when we're doing this as the live paint, I'll be here and you'll be feeding in questions. What did you do there? What color was that? Why? I always struggle with this. Can you give me some tips? And that's why this live paint is such a unique experience that it's like sitting in the room with me and asking questions while we paint. You could paint along with me. You can watch it recorded and paint at your leisure and still have access to me. It's just think about what it would be if you went to a workshop and you were taking these classes. That's exactly what this is. I am here with you. You're asking questions. Only this way, you don't have to get in your car and put gas in your car and get dressed and go someplace. You just sit in the comfort of your own home, and it's like having me as a one-on-one session in there. So I worked so hard to figure out how to bring this to you, and I'm just so excited because there's nothing like a teacher right there when you want to answer or ask a question. So use this opportunity in this live paint to build your style and ask those questions that maybe you've been struggling with, and guaranteed if it's a question you have, somebody else has it too. So, and it's an opportunity for me to connect. I love how painting connects. And, no matter what the subject is, it doesn't really matter. It's how we process how we're doing. And I so want to bring you how I process and kind of let you in on that little inner workings of what I'm doing. Because I think each artist does that, and it's something we do innately, and to be able to somebody ask the questions that pulls something we do naturally out that we don't realize we're doing is a beautiful learning tool, not only for you but for me, because sometimes I'm not aware of it either. And you'll see there's just a little bit of mixing. I'm not using tons of paint, but I'm using enough to build layers, and that's the beauty. Haven't added a lot of white. The white comes in much later on those layers, because a lot of times white will dull your color, and I don't want anything to be dull in my work except for maybe the contrast between the background and the subject, and that's really what I'm playing on here. I want my subject to sing and stay bright and potent, and the background, even though I love teal and it's always the right color, to just subtly fall back with that white, to just be a little bit less brilliant. And you'll see here, just creating depth, I realized that everything got pretty bright on those sunflowers. And by just adding a little bit of that dark shadow color in underneath there, now all of a sudden it's got a depth to it. And that's really working on value. We'll constantly be referencing value. We'll be working on taking your paintings from flat to dynamic and inspired. And that's really what this is. We're going to get together every month, and we're going to hone in on stylistically developing more of a potency to your work, a richness, a dynamic, that's intrinsically you as well. Because I don't want you to just paint like me. I want you to learn what I do so you can really capitalize on painting like you. And that's just all value. Just adding those subtle little value changes in there is really, really what we're doing. And that's why I wanted to walk you through this. It's kind of hard to explain, well, what did it be in your live painting? Now, I'm going to try to change the times that I do live paint, because I think it's important that if you're on one coast or on the other side of the world, that there's an opportunity to ask your questions live. But if you miss it, or, life comes up, or, this day isn't good for you, it's recorded. And I'm always able to be contacted to ask those questions, and I'll have office hours, so I'll make sure that, if you had a question and you didn't understand something, I'm here. That's the beauty of the live paint. But I think you'll learn just as much from the questions that other people ask as well. You see, I've gone over this background again. Just as much as I go over the flowers, I make sure that I add another layer to that background, and that's just kind of how I marry it. I make it all one story. It's always on the same page, so to speak. We're always working on developing the entire piece, not just one aspect of the piece, and that's what gives it the life. I think that's the light and the life my work has in it, because I'm continuously building it as a story. The background is just as important as the foreground, and it's important to develop both. So I've got a better turquoise. I think I started out with this grungy turquoise, and I keep making it a little bit brighter, a little bit more brilliant. And now I'm going to work on the table here, because I want to pop that up a little bit. But again, I don't want white. I want something that's like a grayish, mutish. I'm just mixing some colors here to get something. And you know what? A neutral is a neutral. It doesn't matter if it's a green neutral or a blue neutral. It's like color without color. Even this, you're like, that's clearly purple. And then all of a sudden you're like, oh, no, there was orange in there. And orange and purple make, neutral. And this is another thing. We're going to learn how to just work with a basic color. Work with this color palette to make all the colors you need. And that is something you have to practice and develop too. I didn't come to it easy. I wanted to use every color they made. I'm not going to lie. Doesn't mean that in my other work I might not pull out a color that's not in here. But I think as far as basics go, this is all you need. It's all you need, especially if you're just starting out. And you'll see I added a little bit of that medium to this because I want to work wet and wet. I don't want the shadow to be in one spot and I don't want the table to be in another. I really want these married blends where they touch, you get this interesting purple and this interesting white. And it doesn't look disjointed. It all looks like it's, again, part of that story. And I also do think that there's a back and forth. I think it can get frustrating when you don't realize that it's not just one layer, that really you need to put those, for me, I need to put those 4, 5, 6, 7 layers in order to build and develop, because stylistically that brushwork is what really gets me going. So I want those layers to kind of peek through, and even in the background, it's 3 layers in on that background color, but yet it's not flat. The brushwork, the little peaks of color that were there initially are still there. Randomly throwing in this aquamarine blue, but I buff it out. It's not going to be something that's in your face, and by giving it that little bit of blendability in there, it's peaking, but it's not. It pushes it back because it's a little bit darker. Your eye reads it as a shadow-ish type color, so it looks like it's further back, and it's just a play on value. And as you work through these lessons, you'll get stronger each time. You'll understand why. You'll repeat that, and you'll own it. And that's the thing. You have to do things enough times to really own it. You know, I wanted to paint a coffee cup. I painted a coffee cup 60 canvases in. The same cup, just kept turning it until I owned it. And that idea of practicing is what we're going to really develop here. It's like having a one-on-one tutor sitting with you, almost like a mentoring session where I'm showing you what I'm doing, and then, you know, you can ask questions and then modify what you're doing. And I can point out, because we're working on that same type of thing. I can, if yours looks a little flat, I can say, oh, look at the difference in value. And it's just it's a great way for artist and student to connect. And you'll see just little touches. It's not a lot. There's not tons of paint on my brush. Like, look, it's not even like covered in anything. But it's enough to touch it, put it down, and not overwork either, because I'm really trying to work on those brush strokes and keeping that brush work in there as texture. And that's what I'm doing. Look at, I'm not making donuts. That's the other danger. You could keep going around this with a brush and make a donut. None of my brush strokes are circular. They're actually angular or just linear. So just also, see, even that, there's like angles to it, and I'm not going around in a circle. That's another thing that I find will make your work a little flat if you make donuts. And you're taking one color and you're kind of smushing it around, and then it becomes flat. It doesn't have a dynamic, the texture to it. So, you know, that's another thing. Maybe you miss it on the first one because you're so worried about color, and then you realize, oh, I got the color now. Let me now work on the brushwork. Or, you know, Donna really works in these blues, and I really like to work in greens. Let me try to mimic that type of thing in a style or in the color palette that I like. And that's where we grow and develop. And the idea of these lessons is to build and really, really develop your own style. And you'll see here. So here's a little trick I learned from Bob Burridge, which I never noticed, and then now I can't stop noticing, is if you stick to the dark, light on there, if you look to the right of the vase, it should be darker than just inside of the vase. And then the back of the vase should be darker than the wall. Dark, light, dark, light. And that's how light passes through things. So this is something when you start looking at a glass in a window, you'll notice. And painting's all about learning to see. And that's one of the things. If you can't see it, you can't do it. And as I'm telling you this, you'll now be more aware of it. So again, just playing, modifying. I touched a little bit of the flower, so now I got to touch the background. I've got to always make it part of the story. And I got a little smudge there, blend it right in. That's the beauty of it being a little bit wet for a little longer. Blending some of that. Ooh, I love that. Ooh, I love that. And also keeping the texture that's on the outside on the inside too. I want to make sure that it looks like it's still one space. So here I'm making it lighter, because if that's light, the part to the right of that needs to be dark. This glass that I'm making a little lighter here because the light's hitting it. And then the furthest, the right side of the vase, the wall, will then be a little bit darker. And now this is, I call this kind of massaging, like putting a little bit of surprise color, a little bit of the yellow in the vase. That kind of just brings the eye down. It would be like reflective. I'm kind of putting little surprise touches of color in places that maybe you wouldn't have thought of, but yet it doesn't look weird, doesn't look disjointed, because that color is in there already. And I'm refining now. There's a little reflection on the vase of the yellow. I'm just putting these little details. Ooh, I love that. A little catch light on the bottom, but I'm using the colors that are already in it. You could use white, but I decided to take a really yellowish white to bring that idea of the flower down. Now here I've taken, it's almost like a really pale blue or gray, and I'm going to make the top of the glass. This would kind of be like a rocks glass. I don't know, it's a weird rounded glass. Notice how the bottom of the glass is curved. It's not flat. So will the top of that glass, that rim. That rim will follow the same thing. And it's a hint. I'm not going in there to define it perfectly. I'm just kind of adding a little touch that says, oh, there's the top of the glass. I decided not to put any water in this. It's just basically an empty glass with 3 flowers in it. Making a little bit more of that light yellow because I don't want anything to be purely white. There are times for it, but right now I'm capitalizing on all of that color. And I make a little whoopsie down here. It's all good. It's all good. We can fix it. Just making a little bit of a shadow in there. Now this has a little bit of the pure teal in it, just for a little color variation. It's not different, really, but it's different enough to give a little bit of the eye something to look at, a little interest. And it also helps to bring out that vase. We've kind of not painted the vase. We've left the area where the vase would be, and that's how I use that red underpainting in my work. I like little hints of it to show. Imagine this being a white canvas. You wouldn't be able to capitalize on the background as much. You'd be painting in that dark, and that warmth of that red. If you look at my colors, yes, that yellow is technically a warm color, but I use a very cool color of yellow. It's not really warmy, it's kind of cool. So it's my my saving grace is to add a little bit warmth in there somehow, and it's the background layer. And now you'll see on here, I do have a little bit of white. It's blending in, but this time I'm going to try to create the reflective nature of the glass. It's not like just putting, bam, white in there. It's kind of blending in, and again, that's using that open gel. You can use retarder. There's also retarder in there, and that top little white area of those little canisters is gesso. Because they're a little bit more fluid and they move, it's just easier to put it in the little cups. That's why I like this palette. And now I'm making my darks darker. This shadow right underneath that glass base will be a little bit darker, almost the darkest part on this piece. So I need to just make sure that that reads darker next to the bottom of the glass, and then it fades out a little bit more. And you can see, I can really see that red underneath. Oh, I love that. That's the moment I love, when that little bit of red is, even on that table, it's peeking out. Even in the center of this flower, if you notice, a lot of that kind of translucency on the right. Oh, I love that. And now here's another thing about looking at sunflowers long enough, you start to see this. Inside of a sunflower, it's like rings. There's like, and there could be more than 2, but usually I just stop at the 2, but there's like a dark center and then a ring on the outside, and this little lighter area. So I'm trying to give that kind of illusion in there. And I paint over this because I end up not liking what I did. And then I add some teal in there. But this is that idea of just kind of making sure it doesn't read flat. I want to have a darker area and a lighter area, and then that little ring in there that kind of reinforces that there's this little catch light in there. And I love the choppiness of this. Here's my little whoopsie. Whoops, went a little crazy. But I love that light ultramarine blue. I love that color. It's one of those extras I have to have in my palette. But here's a little secret. Somebody was like, you know that light ultramarine blue is just ultramarine blue and white. Yeah, I know that, but I love that, just picking it up and going. So if you don't want to use that color, you don't have to. You can mix light ultramarine blue and white. Otherwise, I like it so much that I just always like it there at the ready. So if you're never going to use that color, light ultramarine is just ultramarine blue and white, but I love that color. So I kind of misshapen that bottom. It wasn't as round. So I now have to go in and fix it. And that's, again, the beauty of having this a little bit more blendable by using that medium in there. I love the bottom of that vase, how it's so choppy. And there's little subtle things to this piece, and it's literally the brushwork that I think changes it. And that might be something that as you're working through this, you might have to develop. Because sometimes that's a subtle difference. You can paint the exact same colors, but if you're not comfortable with your brushwork, that might take time to practice. And notice, not a lot of paint on my brush. And I'm just trying to make that bottom table. It's kind of uninteresting over there. I just want to make something over there. I'm trying to make it a little bit more opaque. And I love little pieces of red, and I work on that shadow a couple times until I get it the way I want. But at this point, without the subtle touches, I could really be done. This is just that, like, when is it done moment, and you keep giving those tiny little touches because you find something wrong somewhere. Everybody's stopping point is going to be different. When you're like, okay, done, mic drop, go ahead and mic drop. And if you want to work it a little bit more, go ahead. But technically, this piece could be done at any point. It's got all the necessary factors, but now I want to go in and just refine. So I hope this lesson kind of made it clear what we'll be doing in the live paint. I just love developing a piece of work start to finish with you, and I think that's a great opportunity to make something absolutely dynamic.